Here we go again. Today, we're back for another mock draft. This week, the Giants sit at pick number 1. Now this shit gets interesting. It really does, because the Raiders are right behind them. Shadur's starting to look better. I'm not really sure. Shock looks good. Obviously, Washington doesn't need one. The Giants really don't. Tennessee's got Ward. He looked good. He maybe needs some weapons. Arizona, they keep creeping into the top 10. Definitely interesting. So let's get started right here. First pick, the Giants. Now, could they stay? Yes. Do I think they will? Probably not. They shouldn't, because the amount of value they will get out of this pick would be ridiculous. If they stayed right now, I think they'd take Arvell Reese, because I just think he's probably the number 2 player available. But I'm going to be making a trade. The New York Giants will be trading with the New York Jets. They'll be trading 2 first-rounders to get Fernando Mendoza. Now, I have said multiple times, I think this guy is probably the best, most sure prospect I've seen in a while. He's very similar to Andrew Luck. His arm talent, he's just so calm, and he's just such a good player on the field as well, and he progressed so much this year. And I think with Aaron Glenn, and I like their offensive play calling, honestly, from, I believe it's Engstrand. Maybe it's Engstrand. I don't know if the pronunciation's wrong there. But I think Jets are ready for a superstar quarterback. And I think this is the guy to change them around and finally right the ship. So, give me Mendoza at pick number 1. Now, Las Vegas Raiders sit at pick number 2. They need a quarterback. Right here, quarterback, receiver, edge. You cannot go another year with this quarterback room. So it comes to the decision of Dante Moore versus Ty Simpson. I've said a couple times I think Dante Moore fits the Raiders more. And now with their OC leaving for Kentucky, it really looks like Dante Moore's going to declare. And I think right here, Reese is definitely the better player. They don't really need him that much. Like in comparison to quarterback, at least. Tyson would be good, maybe if they had, their quarterback position solved. But there's a lot of decisions to be made in the offseason. You never know what they'll do. Kyler Murray's going to be available probably. So we'll see. But for now, Dante Moore is my pick. I think he's the second best quarterback right now. Simpson hasn't impressed me as much lately. Bit of that goes with the play calling, and I think that's going to see him drop down the draft a little bit now. Now getting into pick number 3, the Tennessee Titans. Now they're in an interesting spot themselves too, because they could really go a couple different directions here. Now, the two I'm going to go between for this one, Arvell Reese, obviously. They need an edge rusher. But more than that, they really need a receiver. Jordan Tyson would be really, really good. If we look right here, edge receiver, like I'm saying. So it's, I think you take the best player on the board. I think it's, him and Mendoza, far and away, the 2 best guys there. I think that's the pick. I know he hasn't filled the stat sheets lately, but that's kind of just how they've been using him. Patricia's an NFL-level defensive coordinator, and he's really not, he's not having Reese just go in there all the time. Obviously, the other guy on the edge has had more sacks, but you got to be watching these games to understand how good of a player he is and how he makes the guys around him better, right? And that's what you need from a top line pick. And I think, as much as Tyson would be good, I like the receiver class still, and I think you got to pass up there and take, a top 2 player in the class. Now, pick 3, the Cleveland Browns. If we take a look at their needs here, offensive line, quarterback, safety. So, Ty Simpson, as of now, I would say they wouldn't take a quarterback because Shadur's looked way better. Caleb Downs definitely in play, but the pick here for me is just Jordan Tyson. I think offensive line's in play as well, but I think they're going to look to offensive line at left tackle. That's a spot they've had a problem with the entire season. They have 2 of the worst offensive tackles at left tackle all season. And they have that second pick thanks to the Travis Hunter trade. Obviously, the Jags have been really good, so it's pick 27 now. It's gone up a bunch. But Jordan Tyson, as I said, he's the best receiver in the class. He's the most complete player, most complete pass catcher there is. The only concern with him right now for me, obviously, you can always improve your route running. Such an elite, catcher of the football, but the injury history does, give concern, which it should. Season-ending injury at Colorado is last year. This year he was hurt, and on and off the field. So it's like, if you feel good about it, and obviously, you're getting the best receiver in the class, you have to be willing to take that risk. And I think the Browns are a team that definitely would be willing to do that. I think Washington would be a really good fit. The Giants, Wan'Dale Robinson is a free agent end of the year. Darius Slayton, not that good. Another 2 would be good, for Malik Neighbors, right? When he's coming back next year. So, Jordan Tyson, gonna be my pick here. Now, New Orleans, as I've said, Shuck has impressed me. He is a surprisingly good runner, and a couple different things here. Kellen Moore is just such an elite play caller. Now, this is similar to a couple different scenarios where the Ravens, they let go Mike McDonald. He becomes the head coach of the Seahawks. Obviously, the Seahawks look way better than the Ravens. Liam Cohen with the Bucks, and now similar to Kellen Moore leaving the Eagles. You let the best coach on your team leave the building, and now they're making somebody else look better. Now, the Saints probably have the worst roster besides Tennessee. They're pick 5, though. And a couple things come down to this. Tyler Shuck's performances lately. He's looked so much better. He's been one of the better rookies in the class so far. I've been really impressed with some of the throws he's making. Obviously, him on the run has been really surprising. And they just don't have a really good team around him. The offensive line's nice, but Olave, Juwan Johnson, Devin Neal, that being your 3 best players on offense, not ideal. So, he's making it work, right? And that's what you got to do. But their defense needs more immediate help. Now, could they really take Tate? I think so. So, he's definitely in play. Now, Brandon Staley, we all know him from the Chargers. He instituted some of the biggest collapses in football, right? He had that game where he called a timeout. The Raiders win. The Raiders go to the playoffs. Chargers don't tie. The Chargers-Jags playoff game. But if you look back with him at the Rams, he was an elite defensive coordinator. He was one of the best in football. Some of these guys, they're just not meant to coach. He has this group who I view as a bottom 3 defense, like player-wise. Playing like a top 12 unit, which is insane. But this defense needs an edge rusher. Now, Chase Young's there. I think if you got a good guy across the side with Chase Young, I think this defense, and I think Chase Young could be a way better use to you. Obviously you sign him to a 3-year, $45 million extension. Question marks around that. Now, Ruben Bain, he's not Arvell Reese, but he's pretty damn good. He is pretty damn good. He's definitely a top 5-7 pick. He might have dropped a little bit, but you got some guys played really well as well. So I have no problem with this pick. They need an edge rusher. When Cam Jordan, your best sack guy, and he's playing defensive tackle now, you kind of need to start improving the position. So Ruben Vane's my pick there. Now, taking a look with Washington. Now, Washington's got a couple needs here: edge, safety, corner, running back. Are they in play for Jeremiah Love? Yeah, I guess, but at 6, no. It's just never going to happen. Obviously, Simpson's not really going to happen. I don't think they're going to take Fano. The two, I mean, obviously, safety, edge. The two big ones, Caleb Downs and Keldrick Folk. Um, those are kind of just the two guys that you're deciding between here. Um, and I would actually put Carnell Tate in this, as Debo's a free agent. You don't really have a receiver long term for your guys. Honestly, I think Tate might be the pick here. Terry McLaurin's 30. He's going on 31. He was injured all season. Debo. But after that, at receiver, no, not great. And I think Tate is definitely, he's not Tyson, but he's pretty close. And there's, every player has some flaws in their game that they can, improve on. And I think, behind McLaurin would be an awesome spot for him with Jaden Daniels, and I think this would be honestly a perfect match long term. So, give me Tate to Washington. I don't think it's much of a reach because I do think Tate could really go even as high as 5. I mean, positional value, I just don't think Caleb Downs is going to go above Tate there. Just based on, their team needs. Now, I know safety's been a position they need, edge rusher, but, an elite pass catcher would be really freaking good for them. And they kind of need that. You got to support your young quarterback at the end of the day. And now let's move on to the New York Giants. Now, I'm going to assume Wan'Dale Robinson extends here as well. I think the Giants, linebacker, tackle, corner. Now, a right tackle definitely would help in Fano, but I also think Caleb Downs would be perfect for this defense. They need a leader type. I think, you need a guy. Obviously, you signed Javon Holland, but, Tyler Newbin there you got. But I think you need another guy, and I think Downs is perfect for the Giants. You need a leader, and he's super flexible, like I've said. He's a really good. He's one of the best safety prospects I've ever seen. I'm curious to see how he's drafted. It's kind of hard to draft a safety as there's not really a comparable one for a long time. But somebody's going to be really happy when they pick him, and I'm thinking it's the Giants. So, now moving on to the Arizona Cardinals. Now, Paris Johnson did go and get hurt this week. They're starting left tackle, Pro Bowl caliber, all pro caliber. Honestly, this year he was very good. Their biggest need is offensive tackle, more at right tackle, as Jonah Williams is a free agent. He's been okay. But here, I honestly think Ty Simpson is the guy they might take. Now, Kyler Murray, it looks like it's over, right? It really does look like, the Cardinals and Kyler Murray's time is over. Now, it's pretty disappointing, and Brissett's played better than Kyler has this year, and obviously, Brissett, he's not going to win you games, right? And I don't have a problem if he sat in front of a guy for a year, any of these later quarterbacks, Sellers, Maeva, Klubnik, Mateer, if it really, we'll see who comes out because a lot of these guys have question marks. Now, like Sellers, we don't know. Maeva, Sorsby, Mateer, all these guys could stay in college another year. So, you know, there's a real decision to be made, especially even Levitt, who's now all the way down here, who's probably a day 2 pick. He was a day 1 pick earlier this year. He's announced he's transferring. So, Ty Simpson, I think, would make the most sense for them. I'm not sure how good this fit's going to be because I hate the coaching staff. I like Gannon, but I think the OC is terrible. The team build is horrible. And their lack of Mc, you know, McBride and Marv, and I don't mean, I know McBride gets a ton of touches, but I'm saying together, these guys should be getting 15 targets a game. And I don't mean, 12 targets to McBride and 3 to Marv. I mean, you have to utilize a top 4 pick. It's no different than Kyle Pitts, right? Where you have to utilize 2 guys who are top 4 picks and build the offense around it. There's no Michael Wilson, whatever. Like, that's a guy who's a decent wide receiver too. Now, Michael Wilson's a decent wide receiver too, but you could do better. You can do better, and I mean that in the sense of Marvin Harrison. Obviously he just hasn't lived up to it, but not all that's on him. That's on the OC because the OC just can't get him the ball and as much as he should. And obviously some of that goes to the quarterback. Kyler Murray and him have not really had the connection that many thought they might, right? So I think, quarterback, I think Ty Simpson is quarterback 3 right now. I think he's dropped a little bit, but I still view him pretty good. The OC, who they hire if Petzing leaves, hopefully, is a lot better. Now, the Bengals. There's a lot of speculation with what they're going to do this offseason, right? I'm going to just go out and say I think they're going to take Eldrick Falk here. If he's available, they'll take him. Shamar Stewart was a horrible pick. I don't know how you take him over James Pierce. James Pierce is just such a better prospect. It's another draft blunder from them, unfortunately. And they just can't help themselves ever. So they need an edge rusher. They need defensive players. Cherry Hendrickson's probably going to leave. We'll see. It's a big offseason in Cincy as well. Another team who's unfortunately ran by clowns. So we'll see. Now the Rams. I've pretty much had Fano here just nonstop. I could see Delane, but I think Fano makes more sense based on what they need. Obviously, I've said Havenstein's been hurt, a couple more injuries, and I think just shoring up the offensive line is just kind of what you got to do, right? Now Minnesota here, RB, safety, linebacker, corner in there. I mean, Peter Woods would be a pretty nice pick, you know, in all reality. Now I've had Love here a couple times, and I think that's definitely in play again. So, he's clearly the best running back in the class. If we take a look here as well, you got Price, Coleman, Haynes, but look at this, 13, 40, 81. I mean, it doesn't take much of a casual even to know how much of a drop-off there is in talent at the running back position this year. It's a bit better than that 2024 class with Brooks, Benson, and the other guys. But it's still not a great class, but whoever goes home with Love will be very, very happy. And I think Minnesota makes a lot of sense. Aaron Jones, 30. Jordan Mason's just not the future guy. I think, a big-time running back would be good if you're going to stick with JJ. But I've seen some speculation with, maybe they could trade for Burrow if he really isn't happy. I like the idea. I do. I think out of any of the spots I saw recommended, I think Minnesota makes a lot of sense because I think that team's the closest to winning a Super Bowl. Now, Miami. Miami, obviously, they took Walter Nolan. He's been good. Sorry, not Walter Nolan, but Kenneth Grant they took in the first round out of Michigan. And obviously, he's been decent. The stats. But it's, defensive tackles don't fill the stat sheets like that. So, for the casuals that like to think so. Now, I've had Tate here a bunch. Now, they're in an interesting spot. Offensive tackle, corner. I think corner's perfect. And I think Mansour Delane, I've said a couple times, he's the best corner of the class. It's hard when, McCoy obviously tore his ACL, and he wasn't playing the entire season. But he did declare for the draft, so we will see how he looks and hopefully, participates in all these different things leading up to the draft, because it would help his stock at the end of the day. So, now, for Miami, I do think they would take Mansour Delane. I think Moaga's in there, but you definitely need a corner on that team. They've had a rough year at corner. Now, the Ravens, defensive line, wide receiver, tight end. Now, locking up Andrews, they're just not going to take Sadiq. And if Peter Woods felled him, it's a home run. Matabuiki, I believe that's how to say his name, looks to be retiring. And they need, a defensive lineman. I know Travis Jones has been good, but Peter Woods would be a home run pick here. Even though offensive tackle would be nice, Lemon would be nice, but I think it's a reach. So I'm going to be going with Peter Woods there. So moving on to one of the most interesting teams here. Now, they're at pick 14 with insane, tight end, D-line, edge, linebacker, safety. David Bailey's definitely in play. Moaga makes a lot of sense based on, Jawan Taylor. Josh Simmons can basically play tackle or guard as well. They kind of just need that. But someone that makes more sense to me, and I've had him here a couple times too, is Sadiq. Now, if Kelsey's going to retire, which I think he is, I think Sadiq makes a lot of sense, and I hate it because he would be really good, and he would be really good, and I would hate it. I would just fully despise the Chiefs having a really good tight end again. Obviously Gonzalez. Now they had Kelsey and Sadiq, right? Could they take offensive line as well? Yeah. Edge, not as much. I think Sadiq just makes a lot of sense. You need a pass catcher. You need that number 2 behind Rashee Rice, right? And I think Sadiq's best tight end in the class by far. Now, Claire, definitely pretty good. Delp, good. Stowers, but you see a large drop-off. Just in talent, these are day 2, 3 guys. I think Claire is probably a day 2 guy. The other guys, depend on Pro Bowl, Combine, and whatnot. So, Tampa Bay, now, they need a weapon. They really do, but I don't think they're going to take one. I think they're just going to... Now, they need a couple different things, though. That's kind of the problem they are getting into. They got some older players, and obviously, they got to win now, kind of, right? So I think, honestly, offensive tackle makes a lot of sense. A big problem for Tampa this year has been their offensive line, and I think Moaga is a very good pick at 15. Kind of boring, obviously not as exciting. I think Bailey would make sense too. Even McCoy, obviously McCollum has had a lot of problems this year, and I think he would just make just a lot of sense as well. Dean's 30, I believe. So, yeah. Now, Dallas, I've had Delane here most of the time. Obviously, they've gone up a little bit. I think the pick here is Jermod McCoy. Now, they do really need an edge rusher as well, but the hope at that pick would be, you got a lot of good edge rushers in this class. Now, if we take a look here, you got Parker, Howell, Matayo. Um, One of those guys, you would hope, is going to make it to their next pick at 28. Now, I'm less sure about, like, look at corners. Cece's definitely a first rounder. Terrell, I think he's a guy that rises a lot right now. I think even 16, I think Terrell's definitely in play here. Um, I think I think he's going to be a guy that moves up a ton. His tape is really, really impressive as well. But I think Jermod McCoy makes sense for them if if he's able to return from the injury, like and participate in that stuff, because it'll definitely hurt his stock if not. Now, Detroit, I've said a couple times, I think they need an edge rusher. I do think they need a linebacker, and I do think they need a tackle. Now, Taylor Decker, kind of where I'm getting into here. Taylor Decker has been hurt, mid, just not as good this year, unfortunately. But they also really do need an edge rusher, and I think David Bailey falling to them is perfect, and I think that's a good guy for them to take. As they do need someone on the other side as Hutchinson, I think Bailey is one of the better. He's clearly one of the best edge rushers in the class, right? So now we move on to the New York Jets, who have picked 18 thanks to the Indianapolis Colts and Sauce Gardner. Now, they don't need offensive line. They don't. They don't really need edge rushers. They don't need either of those two. And I think Mekhi Lemon just kind of falls into their lap here. The other teams have bigger needs, and I think Lemon, I'm not going to trust Adonai Mitchell off one good game. And I think you got to get weapons for your quarterback. And I think, Mekhi Lemon's perfect. He's a very good pass catcher. Obviously, his size and like his body type is just like not the most ideal, but at the end of the day, he's an elite pass catcher, and if he's playing with Mendoza, he'll probably be pretty good too. So, moving on to the Pittsburgh Steelers. Now, I think two guys are in play. Obviously, we look at needs here: wide receiver, offensive tackle. I like cornerback too because, besides Joey Porter, I just don't see a guy in there, and I'm thinking like Terrell, Denzel Boston. No, I really do like Boston, but I just don't see it. Um, and I mean that because he's just not a guy the Steelers would take. Now, if you were to go off a guy the Steelers would take, it's like Skylar Bell or, you know, Bryce Lance in all reality, because these are just two guys who just haven't proved as much, and they just love those players. Like Roman Wilson, I don't know. They just continuously draft like the weirdest players at receiver. So I just don't see them taking Boston. It just doesn't make a lot of sense. I think offensive tackle is a big need for them. They've just had a lot of problems the last couple of years here. Obviously, they lost Dan Moore in free agency. Obviously, not that good for the Titans, but still, Broderick Jones on the other side. I think Proctor's a pretty good player and a pretty good pick. Now, the Panthers. Edge rush, corner list as their two biggest needs. Now, TJ Parker, obviously, I've said a couple times. Obviously, he didn't have the season we were expecting, as he was mocked right around a top 10, 12-ish pick. But I do think TJ Parker is still the best player on the board here, especially based on their team needs. They've had a real problem attacking the quarterback this year. And I think, it's you have a clear need on the team. I think corners obviously, can be improved, but I think, there's definitely a more pressing matter at hand. And again, I see Denzel Boston definitely being in play there. Terrell would be a really good pick too. Linebacker, I don't see it as much, but another white linebacker in Carolina couldn't go wrong probably. So now the Eagles, they're in an interesting place. Edge, tight end, I don't view it. Tackle, we're basing it off, you know, not not sure about the future of Lane Johnson, right? So this is kind of an interesting spot. Obviously, Terrell's definitely interesting. I really do think AJ Brown will be out of town, and I think they're going to take Denzel Boston here. And I think, you know, now I I really like Casey Concepcion. I've said a couple times I think he's the wide receiver 4 in the class, but I think Boston's going to get taken over him, which is fair. At this point, Boston's probably proved more. Concepcion has the college football playoffs with Texas A&M next weekend, so that'll be a big game. Kind of just deciding if his fate can move up. Obviously, you have the Senior Bowl, you have the Combine as well. He's super quick, and I think he's going to be a really good playmaker somewhere. Um, so yeah. Now Houston, as I said, I mean they need offensive line. Obviously, it's been better lately, but it's a real position of need, and I think Lomu, Ione, either one couldn't go wrong. I'm gonna go Lomu here because I think tackle's more pressing here. Um, and I believe Lomu actually won the award for the best offensive tackle in college football today. So props to him. Now Chicago. Couple different things for Chicago. Obviously, it lists edge rusher. I think Sonny Styles has to be the pick. I just think, they really need a linebacker, and I think um, he makes a ton of sense. Their linebacker core has been hurt all year. He would be perfect with Dennis Allen. He's just been so good in college, and I think he'd be awesome in the pros, whoever gets him. If Denver was worse, maybe it would be them, but who knows. Now, with the Bills, corner, linebacker, edge, corner again, but I really like KC here, and I think this is a team that needs a receiver badly, and I think he would be perfect in Buffalo with Josh Allen. He's obviously got an incredible deep ball. So I think, yeah, I think it would be, a kind of a perfect match, if you will. Um, like he's similar in his playmaking ability to Shakir, but Shakir's such a good, just Shakir's just a weird gadgety player kind of. Now Conception I think could really be a wide receiver 1 in the pros, and I think he'd be awesome. And they clearly need a receiver with Keon Coleman not working out. So now easy pick right here, Ione. I I don't ever want to watch the Chargers play without an offensive line again. I am a Broncos fan, and I don't want Herbert to get injured. And I think, with uh, Alt's hurt, Slater's hurt, but like, holy hell, that offensive line is brutally bad. Um, that was a horrible performance from every part. Pipkins I know got hurt too. Becton's been horrible. He's replaceable. Bradley Bozeman at center. Even worse, unfortunately. So, yeah. Now, San Fran, a couple different needs. Corner would be nice. Corner would definitely be nice, and I think Terrell makes a lot of sense. I think that's a perfect match. Obviously, I've said I think he's going to move up in the draft. I think he'll end up top 18-ish pick at the end of the day. So, now Cleveland, they predict or they suggest Sellers. They also suggest Isaiah World. Now, they're kind of in a weird spot where they do need, you know, offensive line. Obviously, you know, they'll pick in the second round pretty early as well. But there's not really a tackle here, unfortunately, because that pick's been so good. Um, so they're not in a position to take what they want. So I do think corners definitely play. I've said a couple times already this video that I do think Cisse is a first round talent, and I think he will go to the Cleveland Browns. Obviously, Denzel Ward, I think he's about 30 years old. Corner would be a really good pick for them. So now Dallas, I said earlier they need an edge rusher. I think Cassius Howell makes sense. I think he'd be a good pick. He's been really good. He's, you know, a defense that's been weird. Obviously, you know, it's the best third down defense in the country, but they haven't been as impressive as you might think. So I think, you know, adding an edge rusher to a horrible defensive line, you know, obviously Lawrence, Parsons, both gone. You need a guy. You really do. And I like Overshawn, but you know, you need another one, right? You know, next, because it makes Quentin Williams better at the end of the day too. So Seattle, corner, receiver, tackle. Now, I really like the idea of Chris Bell on this team. He's a really speedy receiver. He's got a good, you know, he's got a really weird body type, but he's such an elite catcher. He moves like an RB even. I think he would be perfect. You know, obviously Shaheed's a free agent. You don't really have another guy besides JSN. I think he makes a lot of sense. I know he tore his ACL. He should be fine for next season. Why not? Honestly. So, I think he's a first round talent still, and I think that makes it 6 receivers, I believe, going to the first round. So, yeah. Now, the Pats, I do think they really need an edge rusher. And I think they take Matayo from Oregon. It's just an easy pick there, really. Now, for the Rams, you know, they have a couple wide receiver as well. Do I view someone else in the first round here? Brazil, not really. I don't think so. I mean, obviously I believe he led the SEC in receiving yards this year. But I don't think he's going to be a first rounder right now. Yeah. I mean, Colton Hood, probably the pick here. This is kind of hard. I think this is a spot you trade down, honestly. And I think that just makes sense. Now, the Denver Broncos, our biggest need, linebacker. Trey Greenlaw's been good, but man, it hasn't been pretty. Obviously, Singleton's in there, but he is 31 years old. Drake Greenlaw, you know, injury prone. You need another guy. Drew Sanders has been terrible and injury prone. Get me CJ Allen on this team, and that's it. That's all she wrote. And they give me an A+ for that one. So, let's take a look at this final mock here. Mendoza, Moore, Reese, Tyson, Bain, Tate, Downs, Simpson, Falk, Fano, Love, Delane, Woods, Sadiq, Mawaga, McCoy, Bailey, Lemon, Proctor, Parker, Boston, Lomu, Styles, Conception, Ione, Terrell, Cisse, Howell, Bell, Woolaglagy, Hood, and Allen. And the best 2 guys are left off, Cade, McDonald, and Lenora Sellers. Now, I'm not sure Sellers is going to enter the draft. Obviously, we have our one trade here. That's all, though. I mean, you know, it's a little hard to make trades. I do think there's a couple trade down spots here. I do think the Titans are definitely in a trade down spot. If someone really want to take a quarterback, there's just not a team really to do it. I really do wish the Steelers would consider something like that. It's never going to happen, unfortunately, but it's not a perfect world. And I think, you know, we've got like I said, we have 6 receivers in the first round. We have a lot of corners as well. We have 4 in here, and I think this is the best one I've done yet. And we'll see how it goes. Obviously, we have Tate, being a super high riser this time around, so we'll see. And let me know what y'all think, and I'll see you on the next one. Peace out.